Thanks for tuning into our segment called Building with Universal Base Units on your segmental retaining projects. Originally designed for U-Cara, it has grown with popularity with contractors amongst all their SRW projects. And today, we're going to take a deep dive on why contractors are choosing to go universal base pads versus our traditional methods. And then we're going to get into some best practices on how to install them. So let's first review some of the features with these universal base units. Now, depending on your market and where you might be chiming in from, you'll have two different units. You'll have the standard unit or the U-grip unit. Here in Michigan, we have the standard unit at 14 inches in width by 19 inches in length, and on the top side, we have embossed grooves to aid you in the alignment of your retaining walls. The U-grip base pad available in some markets has grips designated on each end to aid you with sticking your finger underneath to adjust a base unit if you choose to. No matter what unit you have in your marketplace, they both come with the same features, one being low cost. We make these with no color. Ultimately, this is the product that's going to be buried underneath the ground. No one's ever going to see it. We keep this low cost, so ultimately, it keeps your project budget down. Secondly is lightweight. They're 46 pounds in weight, and length is 19, so you're getting a lot of linear foot installed with very little weight installed. This really comes into play when working with products that are super heavy, things like Lineal, Mackinac, or Estate Wall. Let's take a look at Lineal, for example. With Lineal, it is the biggest unit is 24 inches in length. It's really heavy at 4 inches thick, 8 inches wide. Trying to lift that up and put it to the side, adjust your bedding layer, pick it back up, spin it back in place. The universal base unit really helps with the speed of that and take the fatigue off your men. As well as speed, let's take a look at it with 𝐠𝐫𝐞. 𝐠𝐫𝐞 is an 8-inch wide product, 6 inches high, 12 inches deep. It's pretty heavy as well. Now with that, 8 inches in length, every time you're laying one course of 𝐠𝐫𝐞, I'm also getting one course of universal base units installed. You're leveling 8 inches, well, I'm at 19. You're on your second block, I'm already 40 inches down the trench. You're on your third block, I'm already 60 inches down the trench. So speed of installation. Next one is stability. Stability is a big one for us. It's going to help you decrease two things, differential settlement and rotational movement. Now let's talk about differential settlement. We all know when we have a retaining wall like what we have here, we'll go down that trench with our tamper and we're doing a heck of a job tamping. We're running that compactor back and forth. But we know in the back of our head there's something back there that we just feel like we need to run the compactor a little bit more to get that compacted just right. We're worried about maybe a small dip that might develop over time. Well, with a product like 8 inches wide as your base course, if you have that dip, it's more likely to show itself through the wall if it does have any differential settlement underneath that wall. With a 19-inch unit, it's going to help you bridge that differential settlement and have you a much stronger retaining wall long term. Let's talk about rotational movement. Now I'm talking about footprint, I'm talking about a larger footprint. And this is going to apply to your retaining walls as well as your pillars. But the pillar is going to really paint a picture for you. How many of you guys driven past projects where you see pillars tilting or leaning? Now this pillar here that we have is the U-Cara 24-inch wide pillar. And you can see that the universal base units are giving us a much bigger footprint to help us and aid in that rotational movement. And then the third thing is flexibility, which I'm going to get to here in a moment. So some best practices when installing with universal base units is to think about the product that you're installing on top of them. You have the option to installing them as a sailor course, which is the most common application, where you lay one after another in the 19-inch length, or you have the option with larger retaining walls to flip them sideways to help with that rotational movement. A product like U-Cara Standard Backer or Brussels or Rivercrest, you might utilize them as a sailor option. This is going to give you enough footprint for that smaller wall. But as we back up, move into a bigger wall where we're using the large backer with one panel or two, or even 𝐠𝐫𝐞 product or Concord, this is going to give you more stability with that rotational movement. Now let's talk about installing them. Most contractors would typically install with their dead blow, beating each unit in place. We want to ask you to kind of refrain from that. It can be done, but we want you to proceed with caution. Being that these units are 2 inches in nature, they are susceptible to cracking, and that could present challenges for you on the project. We want you to kind of think about the screed lay method, like what we have here. We've got a screed rail laid in the back here, as well as the front. Both of these screed rails are level from front to back and pipe to pipe. At this point, you're gonna grab your screed tool, like we have here, and screed that. Now, when you work in your base, you're gonna be working with your 57 or your 3/4 crusher run as your base, built all the way up. With the base units, what we're proposing is you do 1-inch course of number 8 or number 9 stone and use this pipe method with the screed to aid you in the installation and help you with leveling. So at that point, you're gonna bring in your screed tool, screed across your system here. At that point, what I want to recommend is you grab your tamper. Now, some contractors will lay the base units right on top of that screeded number 8 or number 9 stone, and that's fine as well. And you can seat them base pads into those aggregates with your dead blow, not hitting hard, but kind of tapping them in place. Me, I like to take it one step further, staying off my hands and knees still, and working up on my feet. I'm gonna go through, and I'm gonna tamp. I'm gonna tamp with my tamper. As far as I'm going to go there. At this point, I'm going to throw a little bit more aggregate in that place. And grab my screed tool. And you can see there, by the screed, tamp, and then re-screed, I was able to get a half a shovel and just a few feet more aggregate. So we know that's gonna help us with our differential settlement. So at this point, we're ready to start installing. Eric's gonna bring some universal base units. We're gonna straddle that trench. Grab him by the U-grip base unit. I'm gonna set that bad boy in place. At this point, I'm going to lay all my base units and go across the entire project. I'm going to grab my dead blow, a 4-foot or 6-foot level, and just check for any ones that might need adjustment. Again, I'm refraining from really hammering that unit home. This brings me to my last feature that I love about universal base units, and that's flexibility. Let's say back here is our house, and we're building a seat wall approximately 15 or 20 feet off that house. We're going to measure off that house and set those base units where we might want them. At that point, we're gonna start, and my recommendation is we're gonna start laying our pavers. We're gonna lay pavers. We're gonna come up and start crouching onto those base units, staying approximately 6 to 8 feet away. At this point, we're gonna measure off of those pavers to see exactly where that wall might need to be. So I can then have the flexibility to move that wall in or out, depending on the project, to eliminate any sliver cuts on the backside of that wall. This last feature, I think, is going to drive craftsmanship, and your projects are going to truly stand out. So Shaun, the universal base units are great. Speed, flexibility, stability. But what about the cost? Now, I want to talk about cost for a moment. I took a look at the projects across our country and got the average size project. The average size project has approximately 60 linear foot and an outdoor living space. That's a couple of steps, a fire pit, pillar, and some seat wall. On the average project, we're talking about $170 in cost for these universal base units. Something I believe that we can be charging to our homeowners, purely on the stability factor. And then if you don't think you can, and there might not be that opportunity, well, let's talk about it from the speed factor. Do you think that you'd be able to save 3 to 4 man hours on a project by using universal base pads to cover that cost? I think so. If you don't think so, is it half that? If it is, then I think universal base pads is a no-brainer, because you're going to gain that stability and that flexibility on your projects. I look forward to seeing your projects built on more solid foundations like universal base pads in years to come. Thanks for tuning in.